I have a perspective, which is that the best way to really understand human rights is as freedom from discrimination, whether it's in the Asia Pacific region or elsewhere in the world. And I've done a great deal of my work looking at discrimination in the United States and in Europe. And to give you an idea of how this discrimination is manifest, here are some graphs which show the white population in the United States compared to the Black population and the Hispanic population. You see, over a number of years, the median family wealth has been enormously skewed. Now, COVID-19 has made things even more accentuated than we find them. So if we look at the skyrocketing unemployment rates for compared white men and white women compared to Black men, Black women, Hispanic women, and men and women, we see that the impact is not evenly shared. And it's the economic discrimination which makes it convenient to hate the other, whether the other is a religious group or a racial minority or a political group. So the message I'd like to give is, while it would be great if we could educate culturally everybody not to regard what we call the other as inferior, this is manifested and accentuated by legal and political arrangements in the economic system, in housing, in access to food, in employment, and a whole variety of other things. So it'll take some time before we can eliminate the cultural bias that certain societies have against others and what the others suffer as discrimination as a result. Well, what might be easier and faster and a kind of prerequisite to eliminating this prejudice based on religious, racial, or otherwise different characteristics would be to use the legal system and the economic system and correct the manifestations of discrimination. And that's what I have been looking at. And it's built on a book which I have written and used to teach a course called Technology, Globalization, and Sustainable Development. That's a title that would put any academic to sleep. But I think it's the subtitle that's important: Transforming the Industrial State. And for the purpose of our discussion today, we're interested in transforming the industrial state, which treats people differently as a result of their specific characteristics. And inequality is not inevitable in a society. But if you, for a moment, allow me to reference the economic system, a number of scholars have talked about the fact that the way economic growth is taking place continues this discrimination. Piketty, who studied wealth distribution in the United States and France, talked about the fact that the countries exceed the rate of economic growth and are held by a very small percentage of the elite. Stiglitz is another scholar in the United States who's looked at the regulations and written something called Rewriting the Rules. So you have to change the rules, I think, before you can really address the issue of changing the culture, or at least they have to be done at the same time. And the Euro Foundation in Dublin, which looks at the European situation, has argued that unemployment has been the main driver of growing inequalities in this country during the Great Recession. So is it an inevitable product of economic growth? Will growing inequalities eventually hinder growth? That's the set of reverse question. And there's Gillens and Page from Princeton that have talked about the fact that most of the people, even in this country, do not get what they want out of the political system because an actual economic elite really govern the agenda. And no, that has not been more so than at this time when times are difficult. So one can start by asking three questions. What are the causes of unsustainable industrial systems? And of course, one of the features of unsustainability is racial, religious, and otherwise group discrimination. Then what would we like a sustainable future to look like? We could probably all agree on that. And then finally, the third question that analysts asks are what are the carrots and the sticks needed to fashion and achieve a sustainable future? But there's a missing question, and that's where the politics lurk. What or who is standing in the way of achieving a sustainable future? We have to open up the participatory and political space for ensuring that all relevant voices have influence in the process of change. They can be religious voices, they can be economically depressed people, they can be people who've suffered from segregation in housing, and all the ways in which the system is manifest. Now, how do you change the economic consequences which compromises freedom? You can undertake policies which will accelerate income and wealth transfers, changes in worker and citizen ownership, changes in the supply of essential goods and services. If you don't have a state, as we no longer do in the United States, that give people the essential goods, then those people are going to be obviously victims of discrimination and racial, religious, and other kinds of bias. Have to change what people demand towards more sustainable goods. You have to stabilize and secure employment of the workforce, and labor law is not evenly practiced in many of the countries. It only applies to the unions, if it applies at all. And now in this country, most people are not unionized. And we have to reduce the disproportionate power of corporations, the very wealthy, in the market. This economic system is something which perpetuates the kinds of discrimination which will be the subject of most of the speakers here. And the government provision of essential goods like housing, like employment, like education has to be done without discrimination. Only then, when we learn to live together, we learn that people are going to be able to stand a chance of really changing the basic culture. And something which is not often talked about, the reallocation of government spending between military operation and domestic social needs is something that is essential. In the United States, we spend more than half of our governmental income on operating wars, and we spend more on the military than the next 6 countries combined. And upending or restructuring debt from emerging and developing countries is a way to deal with third world poverty and discrimination. I won't go into great detail, but the book and the article that I've written and is available to you will deal with that issue. Here's the budget for the US government, which shows that the defense is half or more of, and here's the next 6 countries, which don't spend as much as the US completely. So let me stop there and eliminate these sets of slides, but the message is very, very clear. If you want to eliminate discrimination, which is abhorrent to most of us, you have to give the essential goods and opportunities a chance. And you can really only do that by a legal and economic system which really eliminates the manifestations of discrimination. Because if you have a segregated group living in a segregated area, it's so easy to continue the prejudice against those people. So let me stop. I hope I haven't taken too much time, and I'm happy to participate further.